Here is a vase joker, style dramatic introduction. You can use for your speech das dark, psychological, chaotic tone, like a villain monologue. Writing variant, standard, at 8-2001. Do you know what scares people the most? It's not failure, it's not losing, it's not even the courtroom. It's someone they underestimated suddenly winning. They laughed at you. They whispered your name like. They thought you were just another weak player in their little game. But no, you did into their system. You played by their rules. And this wasn't a victory. This was a psychological crime. Well, for a crime so unexpected, even the Germans, the symbol of control, couldn't handle wallows and so cold evil. What they were told contaminated. They didn't faint because you were wrong. They fainted because you proved them wrong. And today I'm not here to talk about winning. I'm here to talk about what happens when the person everyone doubted becomes the person nobody can ignore, If you want, I can also make a full Joker-style speech, 1 to 2 minutes. Herer's more darker version to more villain energy, more motivational Joker version. They thought it was entertainment, a spectacle. Something to pass the time while they waited for the obvious outcome. Their smiles weren't innocent, they were confident smiles. The kind people wear when they already believe they know the ending of your story. Some leaned back in their chairs, whispering predictions. Some exchanged knowing looks. Some didn't even bother to hide their amusement. To them, you were already defeated before you even opened your mouth. Every small mistake you made, they magnified. Every pause you took, they interpreted as weakness. Every breath you drew, they counted like it was your last chance. In their minds, this wasn't a fair fight, it was a formality. A ritual where the result had already been decided. And the laughter, it wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was subtle, a smirk, a raised eyebrow, a quiet chuckle behind a hand. The most dangerous kind of disrespect isn't always noise. Sometimes it's quiet certainty that you don't belong. But what they didn't understand was something very simple. Silence is built moment by moment. While they were busy judging, something else was happening. Your focus was sharpening. Your fear was turning into fuel. Your nervousness was becoming precision. Every second they spent underestimating you became another second you used to prepare yourself mentally. You weren't fighting them. You were fighting their expectations. And expectations can be very fragile things. Then something started changing. Slowly. Almost invisibly at first. The tone in the room shifted. The same people who were relaxed started sitting a little straighter. The same people who were smiling started paying closer attention. The same people who thought they had you figured out suddenly realized they didn't understand what was happening anymore. Confidence began replacing their amusement. Then confusion replaced their confidence. Because you weren't behaving the way they predicted. You weren't breaking under pressure. You weren't showing the fear they expected to see. Instead, you became calmer, sharper, more controlled. Like someone who had already survived worse battles long before stepping into that room. The laughter faded not because someone told them to stop. It faded because they no longer felt comfortable laughing. Doubt entered their minds. And doubt is very loud inside a person who was previously certain. Their thoughts started asking questions their pride didn't want to answer. What if we were wrong? What if we misjudged them? What if this isn't going the way we thought? That's the moment power changes sides. Not when noise increases, but when noise disappears. Because silence in that moment wasn't respect yet. It was shock. The dangerous kind of silence where people are forced to recalculate everything they believed just minutes earlier. The kind of silence where egos start protecting themselves by saying nothing at all. Their expressions changed. The smirks disappeared. The whispers stopped. Even their body language betrayed them. People who once looked comfortable now looked alert. People who once looked superior now looked cautious. You didn't ask them to be quiet. Your performance demanded it. And that is always more powerful. Because forced silence creates resistance, but earned silence creates impact. When people stop talking because they have to watch, that's when the balance shifts. That's when the story stops being theirs and starts becoming yours. In that silence, something else was born. Awareness. The realization that they may have witnessed the moment. They underestimated someone who was far more dangerous than they appeared. Not dangerous because of aggression, but dangerous because of control. Because nothing is more unsettling than someone who stays composed while everything around them expects them to fail. By the time it was over, nobody remembered why they laughed in the first place. Nobody wanted to admit they had doubted you. Because people rarely confess the moment they realized they were wrong. So they stayed quiet. And sometimes silence is the loudest apology people will never say. They thought victory meant reaching the finish line. They believed success was just a simple result. A name announced, a decision made, a final moment where one person stands and another falls. To them, winning was predictable, clean, ordinary. Something that fits neatly into their understanding of how the world is supposed to work. But what happened wasn't ordinary. Because sometimes winning isn't just about proving you're good enough. Sometimes it becomes something much more uncomfortable for the people watching. Sometimes it becomes proof that their judgment was flawed, that their assumptions were lazy, that their confidence in your limits was completely misplaced. And that's what truly shakes people. Not your success, but the destruction of the story they created about you. They had already placed you in a category, maybe the quiet one, maybe the weak one, maybe the one who tries but never quite reaches the top. People love categories because they make life easier. Once they decide who you are, they stop paying attention to who you are becoming. That was their first mistake. Because while they were comfortable with their labels, you were busy breaking them, quietly improving, quietly learning, quietly building something they couldn't see because they stopped looking too early. Winning alone would have surprised them, but what really unsettled them was how you won. It wasn't luck. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a narrow escape. It was control, precision, confidence under pressure. The kind of performance that forces people to question their own judgment. Because when someone they dismissed suddenly performs at a level they didn't think possible, it doesn't just change the result. It changes the hierarchy in their minds. And people don't like when their mental hierarchy collapses. Because if they were wrong about you, what else are they wrong about? If they misjudged your limits, maybe they aren't as perceptive as they thought. Maybe their confidence in reading people isn't as strong as they believe. Your performance didn't just raise you up. It forced them to look at themselves differently. That's why the room felt different afterward. Not because someone celebrated too loudly. Not because someone made a dramatic reaction. But because something invisible had shifted. Certainty had been replaced with awareness. You didn't just take the win. You took control of the narrative. The story was no longer about whether you would succeed. It became about how they failed to see it coming. And people hate being reminded that they overlooked something important right in front of them. Your victory became a mirror. A reflection of their doubt. A reflection of their bias. A reflection of how easily people can mistake silence for weakness and patience for inability. And the hardest part for them wasn't admitting you won. It was accepting that you had more depth than they ever gave you credit for. Because simple victories are easy to process. Someone wins, someone loses, life moves on. But when someone destroys expectations while winning, the result lingers. It stays in people's minds longer because it forces a rewrite of everything they previously believed. You didn't just cross the line. You moved the line. You didn't just prove you could succeed. You proved their measurements of you were inaccurate from the beginning. And when someone proves the measuring system itself was wrong, that's when discomfort appears. Because now they can't use the same standards they once used to judge you. Respect starts forming in uncomfortable ways. Not always spoken, not always visible, but present. In the way people listen more carefully next time. In the way they hesitate before doubting you again. In the way your name starts carrying a different weight than it did before. Not because you demanded respect, but because you forced reconsideration. And nothing reshapes perception more powerfully than a performance that makes people realize they completely misunderstood what they were looking at. Most people think strength comes from talent. Some believe it comes from intelligence. Others think it comes from power, connections, or luck. But very few understand that the real difference between those who collapse under pressure and those who rise above it is something far less visible. Confidence. Not the loud kind. Not the fake kind people wear like a mask. Not the kind that needs attention or approval to survive. Real confidence is much quieter than that. It doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need to prove anything through noise. It simply exists steady, controlled, and patient. Because real confidence isn't about believing nothing can go wrong. It's about knowing you can handle it even if it does. The strange thing about confidence is that most people misunderstand how it is built. They think it comes after success. They think you win first and then you become confident. But the truth works in reverse. Confidence is often built in private moments nobody sees. In failures nobody applauds. In setbacks nobody remembers except you. Every difficult moment you survived without recognition added to it. Every time you kept going when quitting was easier added to it. Every doubt you learned to control instead of obey added to it. Confidence became your weapon, not because someone gave it to you, but because you forged it yourself. Through repetition, through patience, through moments where nobody believed in you except yourself. And that makes it dangerous. Because a person who borrows confidence can lose it. But a person who builds confidence from experience carries something much harder to take away. It doesn't disappear just because someone criticizes you. It doesn't collapse just because someone doubts you. It stays because it was built from proof, not opinions. That's what people noticed. Not arrogance, not ego, but a strange calmness. The kind of calmness that makes others uncomfortable because they can't predict it. When someone expects nervousness and instead sees composure, it disrupts their psychological advantage. When someone expects hesitation and instead sees clarity, it forces them to reconsider their position. Confidence changes how you move, how you speak, how you react, even how you stay silent. Because confidence removes the need to rush. It removes the need to over-explain. It removes the need to defend yourself against every small doubt thrown your way. You become selective, precise, intentional, and that alone can feel intimidating to people who rely on chaos or pressure to gain advantage. They may not even realize why they feel different around you, but they feel it. Confidence without aggression creates a different kind of presence. A presence that says you are prepared without saying a word. A presence that shows you respect the challenge, but do not fear it. A presence that suggests you have already faced internal battles far more difficult than the one in front of you. And that's what makes it powerful. Because the strongest weapon isn't always something that attacks others. Sometimes it's something that protects you from yourself, from panic, from overthinking, from the voice in your head that tries to convince you that you aren't ready. Confidence silences that voice, not by pretending fear doesn't exist, but by refusing to let fear take control of your decisions. People often expect visible weapons, sharp words, aggressive tactics, dramatic gestures. But psychological strength rarely looks dramatic. It looks like patience, like steady breathing, like someone who listens carefully and responds without emotional imbalance. That kind of control changes the atmosphere without anyone noticing exactly when it happened. Because when someone cannot shake your composure, they start losing their own. When someone cannot provoke a reaction, they start questioning their strategy. When someone cannot find weakness where they expected it, they start protecting themselves instead of attacking. And that's when confidence stops being just a personal trait. It becomes influence. Most people believe pressure is something negative, something to avoid, something that breaks people, exposes their weaknesses, and forces them to their limits. They see pressure as an enemy, a force designed to crush confidence and create failure. And they aren't completely wrong. Pressure does break people, but only the ones who never learned how to stand inside it. Because pressure is strange. It doesn't create weakness. It reveals what was already there. Like fire testing metal, it doesn't decide the strength. It only exposes it. Some bend, some crack, and some become sharper. What people expected was simple. They expected the weight of the moment to slow you down. They expected the seriousness of the situation to make you doubt yourself. They expected the tension to make your thoughts messy and your decisions rushed. They expected pressure to control you. Instead, something unexpected happened. You controlled the pressure. Not by making it disappear, not by pretending it wasn't there, but by refusing to let it decide your behavior. While others see pressure as a signal to panic, you treated it like a signal to focus. While others see intensity as danger, you treated it like information, because pressure always brings clarity to those who don't run from it. Every second became sharper. Every detail became clearer. Distractions became quieter. The noise around you faded because your mind understood something important. When the stakes are high, only what matters deserves attention. That is what most people never learn. Pressure is not just weight. It is also direction. It forces you to simplify, to strip away unnecessary thoughts, to remove emotional clutter, to operate with only what is essential. And when someone learns to function inside that state instead of escaping it, they become very difficult to shake. People were watching for signs of collapse. Small mistakes, nervous reactions, moments where the mask would slip, because that's what pressure usually does. It exposes cracks. But instead of cracks, they saw structure. Instead of panic, they saw discipline. Instead of hesitation, they saw decisions. And that creates a very uncomfortable realization for observers. Because when someone doesn't break under pressure the way they expected, it forces a question they don't like asking. What has this person survived before this moment? Because nobody becomes steady under pressure by accident. That kind of control usually comes from previous storms, from moments where things actually did fall apart, from times where failure was real and consequences were personal, from situations where learning to stay calm wasn't impressive. It was necessary. Pressure didn't build you in that moment. It introduced you. It showed a version of you that was already there, waiting for a situation serious enough to require it. And that's why pressure can sometimes become an advantage. Because while others are busy trying to escape discomfort, someone who has already accepted it can move freely. Freedom inside pressure is rare, and rare things always stand out. People often assume confidence comes from easy situations, but real composure is usually born in difficulty. In moments where things could go wrong, but you decide to move carefully instead of emotionally. Where breathing steadily becomes more important than reacting quickly. And when someone demonstrates that kind of control, the entire dynamic changes. Because pressure is supposed to be the great equalizer, but sometimes it becomes the great separator. Most people spend their lives trying to understand the rules. They watch carefully. They listen. They adapt themselves to what is already accepted. They learn what works, what doesn't, what is allowed, and what is expected. There is safety in following a system that already exists. Safety in moving the way others have already proven is acceptable. Because following the game means you don't have to risk standing alone. And that's why most people stay there, inside the invisible boundaries created long before they arrived. They measure themselves based on standards they didn't create. They compete using methods they didn't question. They accept limitations they never tested, not because they are weak, because it feels safer. You were expected to do the same, to follow the pattern, to stay predictable, to operate within the limits they believed defined you. They thought they understood your range. They believed they knew exactly how far you could go, because they assumed you would play the same way everyone else does. But something about your approach didn't match their expectations. You weren't trying to fit perfectly into their system. You were trying to understand it well enough to move differently inside it. That's what confused them first. You didn't resist openly. You didn't rebel loudly. You didn't try to prove anything through noise or dramatic gestures. Instead, you observed. You calculated. You learned the structure so well that eventually you saw something most people never notice. Every system has gaps. Every game has blind spots. Every set of rules has assumptions built into it. Assumptions about how people normally behave. Assumptions about fear. Assumptions about hesitation. Assumptions about how far someone is willing to go mentally before they retreat to what feels safe. And the moment someone stops behaving according to those assumptions, the system starts losing its ability to predict them. That's what makes someone dangerous in a competitive environment. Not aggression, not speed, not even intelligence alone. It's unpredictability combined with control. The ability to make decisions that don't match the patterns others prepared themselves to counter. Because when someone cannot predict you, they cannot comfortably defend against you. You didn't break the rules in a literal sense. You didn't cheat. You didn't step outside what was allowed. What you did was much more unsettling than that. You stayed within the rules, but you stopped thinking within them. And that is what truly changes the balance. Because most people confuse rules with limits. But rules are often just structure. It is people who turn them into psychological walls. And once someone proves those walls are flexible, everyone else starts questioning how many other limits were just habits of thinking. That's why your performance felt different. Not because you were simply better, but because you were operating from a different mindset. While others were thinking about how to survive the challenge, you were thinking about how to redefine it. While others were trying not to lose, you were trying to understand how winning could look different. That shift alone changes everything, because the moment someone stops just reacting to the game and starts shaping it, they move into a different category. They stop being just a participant and start becoming a reference point. Someone others have to study instead of someone others can easily measure. And people always notice when that shift happens. Not always with applause, sometimes with caution. Because once someone shows they are capable of thinking beyond the expected pattern, others become more careful around them, more observant, less dismissive. Not because fear takes over, but because awareness does.